Good morning, everybody who's happy to be in church today. Awesome. Well, my name is Bekah Townsend. I'm one of the pastors here, and I'm super excited to get to kick off this new series that we are starting this week, and it's called Word to the Wise, How to Foolproof Your Life. And so I looked up the definition of what it means to foolproof something, and this is what it says. Proof against human misuse, error, etc. And so you might be going, wait a minute, I'm a human being. How am I supposed to foolproof my life against human error and misuse, etc.? Because there's a lot of etc., right? Well, I have some good news for you. It is possible, and we're going to talk about that today and then for the next several weeks. But I want to start with a story. So I've shared with you that I grew up overseas as a kid, as a missionary kid, and then I came to the States, and so about 20-something years ago, I was living down in Southern California. I was going to university, and we were in the middle of finals, and so we had been studying hard and taking the finals, and so we found ourselves in the middle of the night one night, me and some friends, and we were like, we're really hungry because we've been working really hard, and so we made our way down the street. We went to Denny's, and we're sitting there, I think it was like 2:30 in the morning, sitting there eating our whatever, maybe I was having pancakes, eating our pancakes, and all of a sudden, the street outside starts to wave like the ocean. Wow. And then I look out the window, and the sky has turned blue, and you hear these loud popping noises. And as a kid who grew up in Europe, in a place that did not have what I was experiencing, I freaked out. And my response to the shaking of the ground was to quickly curl up in a ball on the seat in the booth and yell, "Apocalypse!" Now, I had some friends who'd grown up in California, and they knew what this was, and it wasn't a big deal to them. So they were standing there literally laughing their way through it. And then I had some other friends who decided that the best course of action was to bolt out the door. So if you've lived in California for any amount of time, you know that we have all kinds of things that we do to prevent the damage from earthquakes, don't we? We have very smart people who know how to engineer roads and even power lines and homes to mitigate or prevent the most amount of damage possible. And so I was not aware of that. So when the road started rolling like the ocean, I lost my mind and I freaked out. But do you know, in my research this week, that the best response when the earth is shaking beneath your feet is to develop a plan. And the best response actually when everything is going great, say for example, you come into a financial windfall, this is what experts say the best response is to do, is not to make rash decisions, to be careful who you listen to seek professional advice, but above all else, develop a plan. And so, for some of us, the world feels like the ground is shaking beneath our feet. And when that's happening, you might be like me, and you might want to shout, "Apocalypse!" and curl up in a ball. It's very understandable. Or maybe when the earth is shaking beneath your feet, your response is like my friend who knew about earthquakes, to stand there and laugh their way through it. Or maybe you feel like bolting through the door. A quick synopsis of what each of us, a lot of us, I would say, not all of us, but a lot of us are facing today is earth-shaking things like this. We are facing an intense range of stressors. When surveyed, 83% of adults who took this survey said that they were feeling uncertainty and abnormally high levels of stress around inflation, really feeling the squeeze. There are all these external stressors that are out of our control, and almost 70% of those adults are unsettled or unsure about the economy. And related to that, a lot of us are stressed about money, about having enough even to just cover our basic necessities and needs. And what this is what's happening because of these stressors on our lives is then the money stuff is causing fighting and tension within families, because we're having to have discussions about how to spend the dollars that we do have on things, saying we know we need these things but we can't afford them, but we're going to put our money here, and it's causing some tension in families. We feel like we have struggling school systems, and when we look at them, we feel confounded and disheartened. But here's what was interesting to me. 18 to 34-year-olds report feeling more stressed than their older counterparts. And so for our younger generations, this stress is a real thing. It's palpable for them. But for others of you, you might be here and say, oh, my ground is not shaking. I'm actually frolicking through the daisies. Everything is going really well for me. But here's the truth that we're going to look at today and over the next couple of weeks, is whether you are rattled, whether your world is shaking, or you are experiencing success, godly wisdom is the key to foolproofing our lives. And so today I want to start us off with a story about a man named Solomon, who actually is known to have written most of the book of Proverbs, which is where we're going to be sitting for the next couple of weeks. And our story is found in the book of 1 Kings, chapter 3, verse 5 to 9, and it'll be up on the screen. This is what it says. The Lord appeared to Solomon in a dream, and God said, "What do you want? Ask, and I will give it to you." Solomon replied, "Oh, Lord my God, you have made me king instead of my father David, but I'm like a little child who doesn't know his way around. And here I am in the midst of your chosen people, a nation so great and numerous they cannot be counted. Give me an understanding heart so that I can govern your people well and know the difference between right and wrong. For who by himself is able to govern this great people of yours?" Of all the things that Solomon could have asked for, this is what he asks for: an understanding heart. I want you to think for a moment, and I invite you to be as honest as you possibly can. If you were to ask God for anything, what would it be? What is that one thing that you would ask him for? 100 people were asked the same question, and here's a few of their answers. One person said a superpower like Flash, so I could do all of the things super fast. Any moms in the room resonate with that one? I would love to do all of my laundry super fast, right? Or some people said they wanted dogs of all shapes and sizes in their backyard while they live on the side of the mountain. That's like the end-all be-all to them, right? Or here's another one. Somebody wanted free plane tickets to anywhere they want. That sounds fun, huh? Or world peace, a hug from a friend that they miss. Or this one, discernment. It would help with unnecessary heartbreak, headaches, and trouble. And finally, godly wisdom. See, the original language that is used here in what Solomon is asking for, understanding heart, is a heart, it's describing a heart that is giving attention to God, is obedient, is discerning, is listening. And in Genesis, the same word is used to describe Adam as he's walking through the garden with God, and it describes his heart as turned and listening to what God is saying. See, Solomon had just been given a kingdom. It's a huge responsibility. And so his world is probably feeling like the ground is shaking and moving under his feet. But at the very same time, he's been given a kingdom. And so he might feel like he's literally come into a windfall. But in both cases, right, he needs to have a plan for how he's going to deal with it. And this is what he says. I love it. We can learn so much from it. First of all, he admits to having been given these responsibilities. Secondly, he likens himself to being like a child who doesn't know his way around. And thirdly, he wants to be able to know the difference between right and wrong. And finally, he says, that no one by themselves could fulfill this great responsibility. See, the truth is that every one of us is actually like a child trying to make our way through life. And each one of us is given great responsibilities. And they could feel really heavy, and they could make our world feel like it's shaking and moving, and they could be really great and like we're frolicking through the daisies. But with all of those things, the great and the hard and all of the in between, we need wisdom to be able to deal with the situations that we face and the decisions that we have to make and the responsibilities that we have and how we respond to people who come across our path. So let me tell you again, Solomon is known to be the wisest man in history. And this is what he asks for: an understanding heart. And as he wrote Proverbs, in Proverbs chapter 1, verse 2, he tells us what the purpose of the Proverbs are that are going to be written, and this is it. Their purpose is to teach people wisdom and discipline, to help them understand the insights of the wise. And then he goes on for a couple of verses to describe them this way. They are to teach people to live disciplined and successful lives. They are to help people do what is right, just, and fair. They are meant to give people insight into the simple and knowledge and discernment if you're young. They are to allow the wise to become even wiser and for people to receive guidance. Here's the great news today, you guys. Whoever you are and wherever you are in life, whatever age, whatever state of living you are, Proverbs are for you. Because Proverbs are for the simple. Proverbs are for the young. And Proverbs are for people who already think they're wise. Because it can make you even wiser. Somebody said it this way: the purpose of the book of Proverbs is simply to know wisdom and allow it to govern one's life. And so the big idea that we're going to look at over the next couple of weeks in this series is this: that wisdom is living proof of a God-led life that can be foolproofed. And so today, as we kick off this series, we're going to look at a lesson that Jesus teaches, and it's found in the book of Luke, chapter 6. And this is what Jesus says. He says, "I will show you what it's like when someone comes to me, listens to my teaching, and then follows it. It's like a person building a house who digs deep and lays the foundation on solid rock. When the floodwaters rise and break against that house, it stands firm because it is well built. But anyone who hears and doesn't obey is like a person who builds a house without a foundation. When the floods sweep down against that house, when the earthquakes come, it will collapse into a heap of ruins." And so from this passage, we are going to look at three things that Jesus illuminates for us in here for how to foolproof our lives. And they are to lean in, listen up, and live it out loud. And so firstly, lean in. If we're going to find the treasure of wisdom that we're looking for, we have to dig in the right place. Have you guys ever heard the phrase "up a creek without a paddle"? Have you ever been up a creek without a paddle? Is it fun? No. Okay, so last Sunday, I had the fun opportunity to go out paddleboarding with one of my friends. And so we got to the place, and we're unpacking all the paddle boards and all the things, right? And we realized, oh, shoot, we have 5 paddle boards and 3 paddles. So we talk about it, and we're like, oh, we'll be able to work it out. It'll be okay, because we'll just tow 2 of them, right? We'll have 3 people with the paddles, and then we'll tow the other ones. We'll be good. It's all right. We'll make it work. So we get out on the water, and we're not out on the water for very long. And all of a sudden, like 50 feet away, I think she was, I hear my friend scream, "Ah! Oh, no!" And I look over, and she's holding the handle of her paddle. The end of it has fallen in the water. So my friend, my amazing friend, I asked her if I could share this story, by the way, so it's all with permission. But she had a decision to make in this moment, right? She could have just stood there and gone, "Oh, well, I'm just going to stand here or sit here on my board and let the river take me wherever it's going to go. Or she could have gotten down on her belly. Any of you done this, gotten down on your belly and had to use your arms to paddleboard your way down the river? It's kind of tiring, isn't it? Or she could look for the end of the paddle. And so for what felt like an eternity, she circled like a shark in this one spot, looking for the end of her paddle. And I came along as a friend. I tried to be helpful using my flashlight on my cell phone, which, by the way, is not helpful in water, just in case you're wondering. And all of a sudden, she goes, I see it! But what did she have to do? She had to jump in the cold water and grab it. So I have this great video. I wish I could have shared it with you today, but you see her going down like a bird going for fish. You see her going down into the water, and she comes out victorious with the end of her paddle. It's amazing, so fun. Here's the thing. When we're making our way through life, we think we have it all figured out, and the end of our paddle falls off all of a sudden. So think about that. When you're in a situation, you think you have it all figured out, and all of a sudden you go, whoa, wait a minute, I need wisdom. What do you have to do? You have to dive in, to do something, and you have to go grab it and get it. Because it's a lot easier to make your way through life using the tool that was meant to be used that way, to move you from here to there and to guide you and to direct you, rather than just sitting there and letting the river take you wherever it takes you, or even worse, sitting there trying to paddle with your arms and getting exhausted. Proverbs chapter 2, verse 3 and 4 says this: cry out for insight, ask for understanding. Search for them as you would for silver. Seek them like hidden treasures. Look at the emphasis in this passage. The words, they say cry out. They say ask for. They say search and seek. You guys, these are all action words. They require us to do something. You're not going to find something just standing there. It's not just going to appear to you. If you want to find something, you actually have to look for it. You actually have to go looking for it. And I love in this passage with Jesus in verse 47, he says, I will show you what it looks like for someone to come to me. And the word come implies that we move. The word come implies that we act, that we actually do something, and that we move in a specific direction, because it says, come to me. Not walk to Nevada, come to me. Come to me. I read an article recently that talked about some archaeologists who had been braving the wind and the rain on an exposed Welsh hillside, attempting to solve one of the key mysteries of Stonehenge. But would you know that for almost a century, they had been digging in the wrong place? Digging in the wrong place. And a gentleman by the name of Richard Bevins, who's the keeper of geology at the National Museum of Wales, and one of those involved in the study that actually discovered that they had been digging in the wrong place, said this. He said, I don't expect to be getting any Christmas cards from the archaeologists who've been excavating at the wrong place over all these years. He wasn't a popular person. But here's the thing. So oftentimes, we might move ourselves to the point of even admitting, I need wisdom, I don't have it all figured out, but we look for it in the wrong places. These are some places that we tend to go. We tend to go to common sense. We tend to go to popular thought. We tend to go to our own intellect. And these things in and of themselves are not entirely bad. But if they're the primary place that we go, if we are not looking to Jesus and his wisdom, these things will let us down. We go to others' opinions. We see what we go to what we can see or what we can touch. And so I want to ask you today, when faced with confounding decisions, when faced with the big questions in life, where are you digging for your answers? What are you leaning into? What are you looking for? When you face situations like these, and see if any of these resonate with you, where should my kids go to school? How should I take care of my aging parents? When should I retire? How should I love my spouse? Who should I marry? Who can I ask for help? Which relationships are worth investing in? What should I do with my life? Or how should I spend my time? We have a choice of what we are going to lean into, who we are going to lean into, and then ultimately where we are going to search for those answers. Michael Youssef says this: godly wisdom is the kind of wisdom that comes from the very heart of God, who is all wise. So what if instead of leaning into opinion or intellect or common sense, we leaned into the heart of God and dug into the heart of God? The hopeful truth is that we can begin to foolproof our lives by leaning into Jesus. And once we lean into him, then the second thing that we need to do, the action step that we need to take, is actually to listen up. So my dad a couple of years ago had to go get his hearing tested. Anybody had their hearing tested? It's a really fun experience, huh? So the lady explained to him all the rules of going into the room and what he was supposed to do with pushing the button and things like that. Put the headphones on his head, and so he goes into the room, and all of a sudden she barges back into the room and says, "Mr. Rossi, the test hasn't started yet." He literally had been sitting there going like this for like 5 minutes, paranoid that he was going to miss the sound because he didn't really know what he was listening for. And so here's what I would say to you. There are two very practical ways of leaning into God and to listening up, and they are these: reading his word and praying. But it could be that I say to you, lean in, listen up, listen to Jesus, read the Bible, pray, and your response is, wait a minute, I don't know what I'm listening for. Or you could be listening really hard, but you're pushing the button because you're just so paranoid you're going to miss something. Here's the deal. There's a lot of noise in our world today. A lot. Okay? And when you go in to get your hearing tested, they put on those ear muff things to cancel out noise, right? So that you can actually hear the sounds that you're supposed to hear. And so maybe the first step for us is we need to choose who and what we want to listen to. And then secondly, we need to eliminate other noise. Anybody here want to join me on the shame stage of admitting that the first thing you do when you wake up in the morning and open your eyes is to reach for your phone off of your bedside table? No, just a few of us. Okay, the rest of you are way more holy than us. I do this, you guys. It's a horrible habit. I literally open my eyes, reach over, and I tell myself it's because I want to know what time it is. But I open up my phone and I start like, what emails came through? What text messages did I miss? What's the weather going to be today, right? Going through all the things. And what happens the minute I do that? The minute I reach for that phone and I open it up with my beautiful face, what happens? The whole noise of the whole wide world comes flooding into my bedroom. It comes flooding into my brain and into my heart. And so here's what I commit to you to do. Okay, I'm committing to this. I am going to put my Bible by my bedside, and I'm going to move my phone over about 6 inches so that it's harder to reach, and I'm going to try and reach for my Bible this week first thing. Because, man, if we could start our day with the Word of God before all of the other stuff, we could listen up and hear what he wants to say to us. And then by hearing from him, by quieting out all the other noise, we can then hear how he wants us to live our day out. We can hear the things that he wants to say to us. Can you imagine starting your day with hearing from your Father, I love you. Hearing from your Father, I have a plan for your life. I have good in mind for you. Can you imagine starting your day like that instead of with a bunch of noise? I love how Beth Moore says it. She says, if destruction fails to entangle us, distraction will do its best. And we live in a distracted world, and it is hard. It's going to require action on our part to counteract that distracting world. We're going to have to fight for the quiet with God. We're going to have to fight for the time in God's word. We're going to have to fight for the time to pray and to listen to his voice. In 1 Kings chapter 19, there's a story, and it goes like this. Then a great and powerful wind tore the mountains apart and shattered the rocks before the Lord, but the Lord was not in the wind. And after the wind, there was an earthquake, but the Lord was not in the earthquake. And after the earthquake came a fire, but the Lord was not in the fire. And after the fire came a gentle whisper. And when Elijah heard it, he pulled his cloak over his face and he went out and he stood at the mouth of the cave. Think back to the very beginning. Think back to the kind of heart that Solomon asked for. It was an understanding heart, which is a heart that is turned towards God, that is listening, that is obedient, that is discerning. And in this moment, Elijah is able to discern where God's voice was. That's what God can do for us, is to give us the ability by his Spirit to be able to discern where the voice of God was, and it was in the whisper. See, wisdom is the ability to discern or judge what is true and right and lasting. That's what wisdom can do in our lives. But there's a difference that we need to be careful of understanding, and it's this. There's a difference between being familiar with God and being intimate with God. Being familiar with God would look something like this. I know about God. I know that he created the heavens and the earth. I know that there are stars and universes. I know that Jesus is the Son of God. I know that the Bible is the Word of God. That's familiarity. Intimacy is to know the heart of God. And the way that you get to know the heart of somebody is by spending time with them, by getting to know their character, by getting to know all of the nuances of why they behave the way that they do, right? I'm getting to know my husband over 20 years, developing intimacy with him, knowing what his heart feels and thinks, not just knowing facts about him. And that's where we need to move from, is we need to move from a place of familiarity, I know about God, to a place of I deeply know him in my soul. I know his heart. I know his character. I know what motivates him and what drives him. And we can know the heart of God by looking at Jesus on the cross. We can know what God wanted for us and intended for us by looking at Jesus on the cross. Intimacy with God helps us to be able to more confidently discern what he wants us to do. And so you might say, where do I start? Well, here's a few ideas. Place yourself in an environment that helps you to concentrate. So for me, I'm going to eliminate the phone problem that I have in the morning. And I'm going to put myself in a place that helps me concentrate. And then secondly, we can talk to God about what we've read in the Bible when we've committed that time. And what that looks like is we treat it like a conversation, right? We say, okay, God, I've read this. What does that mean? And we have to pause and we have to listen and ask him questions. And we can start small, you guys. It can look like 5 minutes. It can look like 10 minutes. and then it can grow from there. And so I want to challenge each one of us. What noise do we need to turn down in our lives that keep us from listening, from hearing God, from leaning in and listening up? Is it your phone? Or could it be people who give you ungodly advice? Or could it be worldly advice that we're getting from things that we're reading or gathering around us that is not God honoring? The way to know if that is God honoring or not is to hold it up against the Bible that you've spent time in and reading and listening to. Is it the enemy that wants to whisper in your ear telling you lies? Because if you learn what the voice of God sounds like, you will know what the voice of the enemy sounds like. And you will be able to say, that is not of God. That is not God speaking into my life. That is actually the enemy. But guys, that will only come from intimacy. That will only come from deeply knowing him in our hearts and in our spirits. Isaiah 30, verse 18 and 21 say it this way. So the Lord must wait for you to come to him so that he can show you his love and compassion. For the Lord is a faithful God, and blessed are those who wait for his help. Your own ears will hear him. Right behind you, a voice will say, this is the way you should go, whether to the right or to the left. But first we have to lean into him. And then we have to listen to what he says. And thirdly, we have to live it out. James chapter 1 says, don't just listen to God's word, you must do what it says. Otherwise, you're only fooling yourself. In the story that we read about Jesus, when he was illustrating the difference between the person whose house was going to be okay when the world shook and the person whose house would collapse, he drew a contrast. And the contrast was this, in verse 49, anyone who hears and doesn't obey is like a person who builds a house without a foundation. And when the floods sweep down against that house, it will collapse into a heap of ruins. And so we can do all the leaning into God and all the listening to God, but if we don't put into practice, if we don't live out what he's actually telling us to do, specifically, especially around things of wisdom, if God gives us insight and wisdom and understanding, and we know it, we hold on to it, but we don't actually live it out, it will do no good in our lives. And so for the next 5 weeks, we're going to be looking at wisdom and how to apply it to some very specific parts of our lives. And these are what they're going to be. We're going to look at mental health. We're going to look at relationships. We're going to look at money. We're going to look at priorities. We're going to look at generosity and how we relate to God. So as we close today, I want to invite you to stand to your feet, and I'm going to ask you a couple of questions. Go ahead. I invite you to close your eyes, and we're just going to take a moment. And I'm going to read off a few things, and I want you to say whether you identify with any of this. And if you do, you can raise your hand, and I'm going to pray for you. Nobody's looking around at your answer. This is between you and God. Would you say, I'm facing some situations that I don't know how to respond to? Would you say, I need God to meet me as I wrestle with decisions regarding my family, regarding my children, regarding my friendships, my money, my schedules, how I treat others? Are you willing to say, God, please meet me in these places because I can't do it on my own? Are you willing to commit the next couple of weeks to seeking after God's wisdom together with this community? In whatever area it is that you feel like you are lacking. Are you willing to lean in? If you don't know Jesus, I want to introduce you to him. He loves you. He died for you. He rose again to save you. He wants to be your Savior. Are you willing to listen up, to eliminate noise in your life so that you can hear more clearly the voice of God? And are you willing to learn how to live it out? Let's pray. God, I thank you that In your word, it says that if any of us lacks wisdom, and we ask our generous God for it, that you will give it to us. God, thank you that even following that, you say that you will not rebuke us for asking, because you're a good Father who wants to give good things, and all of the things that we need to navigate our way through life, you want to give those to your children. But God, what you're asking of us is to lean in. What you're asking of us is to listen up. And what you want for us is to be able to live it out, so that we can live the lives that you've called us to live, that you've created us to live, that are rooted and grounded in your word and in your wisdom. And so, God, as a community, we commit ourselves to what you want to do in us over the next couple of weeks. But even now, Lord Jesus, there are things that we are holding that we will face this week where we will need your wisdom. And so, God, we are asking for it. God, I ask for wisdom for parents. I ask for wisdom for grandparents. I ask for wisdom for bosses. God, would you help us to lead and to serve and to love well? Thank you, Jesus, that you will meet us where we're at. In your name we pray. Amen.